Hello again and welcome. Today's video is going to be fairly short. It's going to be an overview of the Simon Hope carving jig. And the reason I thought I'd do an overview on it is that I had a few questions asking me what it was about and where they could get one when it appeared in a couple of videos of mine. So I'll be doing that in 1 second. Before I go on to that, I'd like to give a shout out to a guy called Ed Parker from Wolf Ridge Woodworking over in Australia. Ed's got a channel on YouTube and I'll put a link in the description below. Got some great stuff on there, so go across and give him some support. That's Ed from Wolf Ridge Woodworking, and the sticker will be going on the board shortly. Right, okay. I don't carve. Why do I want a carving jig? Well, I got this quite a few months ago now, and I find it invaluable for doing what I term awkward pieces where there's a lot of sanding to be done or there's handwork to be done. You've got fill-ins with, whether it be with CA and sawdust, or whether it be any other form of medium you want to fill your holes with. I mean, I do occasionally use resin, but not very often, not like some of the lads do. And the main problem is, if it's on the lathe, and I'm not making a mountain out of a molehill here, it is a problem. I take this piece here, which it was a bit of scrap really, but I like the look of it, so I'm working on it. It's not a main project, it's just there. And it's a piece of English walnut, and it's full of cracks and voids and everything else, and I've been working on it slowly. Now when it's on the lathe, that's fine. Number one, it's tying up the lathe, because it's not something that's going to dry in 5 minutes. If I'm putting stuff on there, you've got to work on it until it's ready to turn, finish turn. I actually wet turned this bowl, and I came to finish turn it, and I should imagine there's about about a quarter worth of sawdust and CA in it. But the point I'm making is this: while it's on the lathe, okay, number one, it's tying up the lathe, okay? Number two is that wherever you put it, you can lock the spindle, but sometimes when you're putting thin CA glue in, you want it to remain vertical to where you're actually putting it and not dribble everywhere else. And you can lock the spindle, but 9 times out of 10 it's never in exactly the right position. Now the jig, the carving jig, makes those sort of jobs so much easier. Not even if you're not even carving, just doing those sort of jobs. Now what the main thing is, if for example you finished a piece and you've got to work on, you finish the outside, everything is concentric. If you take it out of the chuck, even though, I mean, all my jaws have got a mark on them, and I'll mark the back of the piece so that when I put it back in the jaws, it's in the same position. Sometimes they never seat perfectly. Well, this, if you take the piece and the chuck off the lathe, now you've freed up your spindle, fair enough, and now all you do is to screw it onto the carving jig. Now they come in various spindle sizes to fit, I think it's 3 or 4 different spindle sizes, and the same with the post as well. This is a 25.4, or what I call a genuine inch post, but they do the 25mm, I think, 30mm. They cover about 4 different post sizes as well, so it'll fit most banjos. And this just slips into the banjo like your tool rest, and then allows you to work on the piece unhindered. Now what I'll do, I'll bring the camera in a bit closer and show you how the jig actually works. So we've got the jig in the banjo, it's secured in the banjo, and the chuck and the piece that you want to work on is screwed onto the spindle of the jig. It has 2 movements. You can obviously move it around by loosening the banjo, and you can have it as high or as low as you want. Okay, now the other movement is by this lever, and all you do is undo the lever, and that allows you to move the whole chuck and piece, and then you just lock it off in the position you want. Now with the other range of movements, a nice feature is if you undo it, it actually has an indexing system inside. So in other words, it doesn't just flop and can fall onto the bedways or onto the banjo and damage your piece. So you can then move it to where you want, and then just locate it in one, I think there's about 12 holes there, and then tighten up, and you can work on there. Now you want to move it down a bit, it's not quite in the right position, you can move it to there, get it into one of the indexing holes, and away you go. Now if I was going to fill, like for example this void here, I could have it exactly where I wanted it, and the CA or the epoxy, whatever I'm putting there, isn't going to run everywhere. And obviously if I was carving or doing any detail work by hand on here, I can have it in exactly the right place that I want it. So in that respect it's great. Now I've gone a stage further, because obviously I'm still tying up the lathe with this, so I've just made a little stand, if you like, that I screw down to my bench top, and I can work on this. It's still on the chuck, it's not going to move, and I can use one of my other chucks and do some more work, or even do some spindle work if I've only got the one chuck. But it's the most important thing is that it gives you the flexibility to work on the piece exactly where you want to, and obviously the most comfortable. So what I'll do, I'll just change the camera angle yet again and just show you what I've done, which is a very simple little piece of equipment which allows me to take it off the lathe and work on it on my bench, and it can dry if it needs to dry before I work on it again, and it's not tying up the lathe. Okay, so what I've got here is that little jig, if you like, a jig for a jig. All it is a couple of pieces of scrap, and I've drilled a hole in the size of the post, 2 screws, and just tack it to the bench. It's not in there with any great vigor. Nice and solid. And then what I've done here, I've just put a threaded insert into the wood here, and a bit of all thread with a very roughly shaped handle, which I can tighten up to lock down the size. Come off the lathe, and I've screwed the chuck and the piece onto it, and now if I want to work on it, let's say in this position, all I do is tighten up this little screw there, and that does it. And then I can move it around exactly as I want to. So if I undo it here, I can move it to any position and work on any part of that I wish. And if I, rather than undoing this all the time, if I could undo this one here, and I can spin it around freely as well. So it gives me that total flexibility, and it's not taking up the lathe now. I could do some spindle work if I haven't got a spare chuck, but it doesn't tie up the lathe. So that's just something that took me about 20 minutes, I should think. It's not finished perfectly, but it does the job. Well, I hope some of you found that of interest. A great bit of kit, especially for working on a piece off the lathe even. Don't even have to keep it in the banjo and tie up your lathe, but it's great for putting in the banjo and working on exactly the right position you want to, whether you're carving it or whether you're piercing, or whether you're doing what I mainly do, a lot of hand sanding and filling work on awkward pieces, like that ugly bit of U I did, that gnarled U piece. I mean, there was a lot of hand sanding in that, and tiny little bits doing here and there, and I could have it in exactly the right position I wanted, and I could take it off the lathe and stick it in my little jig there, and then you're not tying up the lathe, and you can work on it when you want to, as and when. Okay, so the links will be in the description below to this particular piece of kit, and indeed to Ed Parker's Wolf Ridge Woodworking's channel. And next week I shall be turning this lovely piece of laburnum that was very kindly given to me by my old mate Mick Stratton quite a few years ago now. Thanks again, Mick. Turning a hollow form out of that, and I'll be topping it off with what I'm going to call a faux ebony finial. So all will be revealed in the next video. In the meantime, thank you very much indeed for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you very soon. Cheers now.